As a uniformed officer in the Secret Service, Gary Byrne stood guard outside the Oval Office while the Clintons served inside. It was his dream job, but Byrne witnessed things that led him to speak out in his new book. Crisis of Character. A White House Secret Service officer discloses his first-hand experience with Hillary, Bill, and how they operate. He details how Hillary belittled Secret Service officers on her detail, even throwing a Bible at one agent, hitting him on the head. In front of cameras, he says the former First Lady was warm and friendly, but outside the public eye, he says she was cold, emotional, and even dangerous. Byrne reveals he tried to keep Monica Lewinsky away from President Clinton and that he concealed other affairs the president had inside the White House, including one with Eleanor Mondale, the daughter of former Vice President Walter Mondale. Before she died, Eleanor suggested she and the president were just friends, and Clinton allies are also fighting back, saying Byrne didn't have the access that he claims. But as Hillary Clinton now seeks the White House, Byrne writes that from the bottom of his soul, he knows she lacks the integrity and temperament to serve as president.
Well, former Secret Service officer Gary Byrne is joining us now from Washington. Gary, I want to ask you something. You know, I had that presidential thing, and I had a detail, and I did a lot of talking in front of those men, but I was under the impression that they had signed a non-disclosure agreement where they couldn't talk about that. How did you get free so you could talk?
First of all, good morning, sir. I'm grateful to be here.
Thank you.
At the time that I was in the Secret Service Uniform Division, there was not a disclosure agreement. And to be honest with you, I never thought I would be compelled to do this. But as time went on in the last couple of years, I feel I have to. I feel it's my duty to let the American people know what the truth is. This woman's about to become president of the United States, and I don't think it's a good thing. Based on what I saw in my years there, I don't think it's a good thing. Clearly, I've made a decision to go forward and tell these things that normally wouldn't be told. But it's not the first time somebody from the Secret Service has done this. And I'd also like to point out that I wasn't the one that compelled me to testify. You know, it was President Clinton's behavior that brought myself and all these other Secret Service employees into this Monica Lewinsky scandal. It was their behavior that set this up.
You know, you point out in here, and I remember very clearly, he held out and said, "I have not had sex with that woman, Miss Lewinsky." True? False?
False. The testimony tells it. And, you know, when he made that statement, myself and the other officers and agents that knew they would be involved in this, it made us sick to our stomach because we knew they were going to drag us through this. Instead of the president doing the right thing and stepping forward and telling the truth, he decided to try to evade and ended up dragging everybody into this and making himself look very bad.
Gary, I want to read something that's in here. I thought to set things up. Let's say it straight out. Hillary Clinton lied about the reason for the Benghazi attack. She lied about it to the nation as a whole, and she lied right in the faces of grieving family members of those who died there, then lied about her lying. And she keeps telling Americans one huge, disgusting lie after another. As I wrap up writing this book, Hillary has claimed that, quote, "we didn't lose a single person in Libya," unquote. Really? Try telling that to the families of the 4 men we lost on September the 11th, 2012. Not long before Mrs. Clinton committed that amazing, bizarre falsehood, the late Sean Smith's mother, Pat, broke down on national television, exclaiming, quote, "Hillary is a liar. I know what she told me." Pat went on to say that she wanted to see Hillary in jail for her misdeeds at Benghazi. She's been lying. She's turned the whole country into a bunch of liars. 2 decades ago, the late New York Times columnist William Safire wrote, "Americans of all political persuasion are coming to the sad realization that our First Lady, a woman of undoubted talents, who was a role model for many in her generations, is a congenital liar." That's a pretty strong indictment. You really believe that? I mean, you have firsthand, examples of her lying. Could you give us a couple of them?
Well, the things I cite in my book, Crisis of Character, is mostly about her behavior. But certainly the case that you cite with Mrs. Smith, where, I mean, how do you tell a grieving mother one thing, and then later on she finds out the truth is something else? And at the same time that she's lying to this mother, she's texting other people and telling them what the truth is, that it was a terrorist attack. That's the best example that I've seen recently. Other examples that I cite in my book, Crisis of Character, when I worked there, there's many of them. I can't think of one offhand right now.
All right, well,
but there's many of them.
Let's go to something you did notice. There was a vase. Apparently, the White House is like a museum with all these treasured artifacts. And you heard a crash, and a vase was smashed, thrown by Hillary at her husband, correct? Could you tell us about that?
Well, that's not exactly the way. I came into work one morning, Pat, and I was talking to my coworkers, and they were telling me that there had been a big fight upstairs. And I know this sounds a little voyeuristic, but you have to put it in context. The White House is very old. There's big stairwells, elevator shafts, and they were yelling so loud the sound came down. And during this fight, they heard a crash. When it was investigated, somebody found a broken vase. Now, this has been reported as a broken lamp or something else, but it was a vase. Because shortly after my friend told me the story, I walked over to the White House curator's office, looked inside, and there was the broken vase in a cardboard box. And based on the reaction of the curator that was in there, I was sure that that's exactly what I was looking at.
Well, you talked about the fact that this was a relationship of deceit, that when they were close together, they didn't touch, they didn't embrace, they weren't kissing, they weren't close. Yet before cameras, suddenly they're holding hands and hugging. And was it all a charade? Is that what you were saying?
I think to a certain extent. I mean, I wasn't, don't get me wrong, I didn't live up in the private living quarters with them. But when I saw them, which you might call private, like, you know, walking around the complex or talking to each other, yeah, it seemed like a business relationship at best.
Well, what about her? I mean, did she ever talk to you? You mentioned she threw things at one of the Secret Services. I understand she hit somebody over the head with a Bible. Was it on the way to church or something? Was that what happened?
Yeah. So one morning I was standing posting with an agent outside the Oval Office, and I said to him, I heard somebody got hit with a Bible. What happened? And he said it was me. And he said he was on the South Grounds in the limousine. He was driving. The First Lady was sitting behind him, and for some reason she was irate about something. And she had a Bible in her hand, and she struck him in the back of the head with the Bible for some reason. And it made him very mad. He turned around, and he made it very clear to her. He turned around the best he could, sitting in that car, and he just described to her that that wasn't going to be acceptable behavior. And he reported it up the chain of command, but basically their attitude with this kind of thing is, that's the way she is, that's what's going to happen. It's not the first incident, and it won't be the last.
Well, talk about this explosive thing. What would set her off in terms of anger? Was it trivial things or major things?
Well, to me, they were trivial things. I mean, if you're going to work at that level in the government, you really have to have a perspective of what's important, and what's important is people's lives and protecting your country. Here's an example, a good example, Pat, is one morning I was going to get some information for a tour, and I was up in the social office, which traditionally is where the First Lady works. And there was 3 women up there that worked with Mrs. Clinton. These were co-workers and friends from Arkansas. And they were having this discussion, and they seemed very agitated, to the point where I actually thought something was wrong. I asked if somebody was sick, if there was something wrong, and they said no, that there had been a mistake made by an intern ordering these invitations for the White House, and the invitations were useless. And their anxiety was not that the invitations were useless and that somebody wasted all this money. They were terrified to have to tell who was going to tell the First Lady that a mistake had been made. And that always stuck with me. I'm like, this is somebody you're working for all these years, and you're terrified to tell her that a mistake was made. It's just, and as time went on, I saw many examples of this.
Well, give us some more of them. What else?
Well, the example that we just talked about the agent being struck with a Bible. And then another time I was asked to do a tour of the Oval Office, my old post, for some guests of the Clintons from Arkansas. And this staff member wanted to bring them over and leave them in the Oval Office, and which is not acceptable. There's many rules and guidelines that dictate how people, when the president's not in the Oval Office, how the staff or the family can go in and go out of there. So I explained to the staff member that what she wanted to do wasn't possible, but she could escort them and then take them across the hallway to the Roosevelt room. So she said this wasn't acceptable, and the staff member berated me, and I'm going to tell Mrs. Clinton. And I got to tell you, as I'm retelling the story again, it just seems so childlike. But so a little while later, the First Lady comes down, and she berates me and uses some, a little bit of harsh language, and tells me she's tired of dealing with us. And I tried to explain to her that these are rules and guidelines that are set in law, and I would try to accommodate her. And after she berated me a little bit more, I finally, said, listen, just when your guests are done in the Oval Office, you can put them I'll put them in the Roosevelt room, and that'll be the end of it. But these interactions with her, with my coworkers, there were many others. I have a couple more if you had the time.
Go ahead, I'm listening.
Sure. Two officers, they were pretty new to the job. They've been on about less than a year. And one morning I was in a break room, and one of the officers came down, and he said, today's a weird day. I said, how's that? And he said, well, I just said hello to the First Lady, and she told me to go to hell. And we kind of looked at him and we said, well, you're going to get used to that. She seems hostile towards us. She doesn't, we told him our opinion. What we experienced was she didn't seem to like the military or law enforcement. So as we're talking, another guy comes over and he goes, that's nothing. He said, a month ago, I said good morning to her, and she told me to go myself. And so a sergeant overheard us, and he reported it up the chain of command, and the senior people in the Secret Service took it pretty serious. They came over, they talked to him about it, they apologized, but they explained to him basically the same thing we had told him, that the First Lady was kind of hostile towards us at times, and that's the way it was.
Well, she used that kind of language. You're talking about the F word. She used that,
yes, sir.
Dressed him and told him to go blank himself.
Yes, sir.
People don't talk that way. Certainly the First Lady of the United States.
Listen, I don't mind if people use Saudi language, but why would you say that to the man that has been up all night protecting you? Yeah. And another significant thing about that story, the second person I was describing, 3 years before that, he was a veteran in the U.S. He was in the U.S. Army, excuse me. And he was on a mission in Somalia, early on in Somalia. Not like today you would think is what we would call Black Hawk Down, but this was before that. And he received a Purple Heart for being wounded. And 3 years later, he gets a job with the Secret Service, and the First Lady of the United States tells him to go F himself. I'm sorry, that's never acceptable.
The big thing in this book has to do with the cover-up, and this Monica Lewinsky, this young girl, 20 years old, 21, whatever, however old, 19, however, whatever.
Right, she was 21 or 22.
21, okay. Well, she was trying to get in, apparently, and what you had in there was so shocking that there's a secret telephone number with all kinds of codes associated with it, only for the President of the United States. And Bill Clinton gave Monica Lewinsky that number. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I believe so. And so here's how it happened. One morning, and at this point, as things were happening, I still tried to give the president the benefit of the doubt. Even though what I saw led me to believe that these things were going on. And some of the Secret Service agents would tell me, Gary, when we're on the road, you don't know what goes on sometimes. So one Saturday morning, Monica Lewinsky showed up at the Oval Office. She was still an intern at the time, and she tried to deliver a stack of papers, which is basically news clippings. And on this Saturday, there was no staff in yet. So she came up and she said I had to deliver this, which was ridiculous. First of all, the president had 2 copies of what she had already, because I put them in the Oval Office that morning when I opened the office up. So, I told her that she shouldn't be here, and she left. Well, about 5 minutes later, about 5 minutes later, the Oval Office door opens up, and the president comes out with this kind of grin on his face, and he says, hey, officer, have you seen anybody trying to deliver something to me? And I said, well, sir, if I do, I'll let you know. And he kind of smiled at me and he shut the door. So I looked at the agent and he said, Gary, you just don't know what's going on. So that's when I kind of came to the conclusion that these rumors were true. So a short time later, Monica showed back up and she went into the Oval Office. I knocked on the door and I let her in. So when she showed up the first time, she would have had to go and call him. I know she went into the West Lobby and made a phone call. So she had to have called the president. And then you just can't pick up the phone and get the president. You have to call on that line, unless you're the chief of staff. But she was not. And that's what I testified to in my testimony when I was compelled to testify by subpoena 6 times.
There's a heart-rending story in here about a Navy chief, I guess he's Filipino, who loves this country and loves the office of president. And he had to do some unsavory business with dirty linen. You want to tell us about that?
Sure. One day, standing my post outside the Oval Office, the Navy steward, Nell, came up to me, and I could tell he was a little distraught. And he said, you know, Byrne, I'm tired of cleaning up this mess. And I saw what he had in his hand, towels, and I kind of knew what he was talking about. And so I decided to, and at this time, we had no idea there was an investigation going on. So those towels would have gone right to the Navy mess, and they would have washed them. And those guys know where the towels come from. And, you know, they're men in the military. They know what that stuff looks like on towels. So I decided it was best to get rid of the towels to try to protect the president's reputation. The last thing he needed at this point was another scandal. So I grabbed the plastic bag, I had Nell throw them in there, and I destroyed the towels. Well, sometime later, when the Starr investigation started subpoenaing us, I was afraid that that might be considered destroying evidence, but luckily it wasn't.
So you're talking, these are hand towels with the president's semen on them that were going into the wash, and the poor guy, the mess chief, was just distraught that was the way the president was acting. Yes,
and you know, a couple of people have come out and tried to discredit my story, saying that what I've just said to you was different than my testimony. I would just like to clarify that there was different incidences. There was instances with hand towels, with tissue, and I only testified to what they asked me. I couldn't tell them everything. There were so many rules and so many lawyers involved in this when it was happening. It's mind-boggling. When you read, if you get a chance to read my book, Crisis of Character, you'll see that.
How many women were involved with Clinton during that time? Do you have any idea?
I do not. I know of 3 incidences that I testified to, and but I have no idea.
Well, you had one thing in your book where Monica was trying to get in to see him, and he was in having sex with some other woman at the time, and you couldn't open the door?
Well, to clarify, I was standing post outside the Oval Office, and he was meeting with somebody, but I believe it was like a legitimate meeting. Now, what you're describing is, at the same time, Monica Lewinsky was outside at the Northwest Gate trying to get in. And his president's secretary, Betty Carey, was trying to keep her outside until this meeting was over with this other person, because she didn't want them to cross paths. And Betty told the officer at the gate who was in there. And the officer mentioned it out loud, and when Monica heard this, she got very upset, and she actually made the statement of something to the effect that he's in here with her when he has this out here waiting for him. And the officers that told me the story, it was so bizarre to them. It was like we were living in an alternative world.
Gary, what did Mrs. Clinton, Hillary Clinton, know about her husband? She must have known a lot about it. Did she display anger? Did you hear her screaming about you philandering so-and-so? How could you, kind of thing?
I never heard that, per se. But I will tell you that based on the reports I remember at the time and what I know from my coworkers at the White House, the first time that she heard that the Lewinsky thing was real was when the president's attorney went over and told her. And I noticed a huge change in her demeanor for a while. Like, I don't want to use the word depression, but she seemed very angry and sad. And who could blame her? But let's face it, from what we know now, that this wasn't the first time, and all those rumors from Arkansas are probably true. Based on what I saw, I think it was. So this wasn't her first time with this.
You have said in your book you don't think she's got the character to be president. You want to expand on that one?
Yes, sir. I think the best example, although this isn't actually in my book, she doesn't have the character, and I'll use this as an example. When she was Secretary of State, we had the incident in Benghazi. Somebody with character, somebody who was a real leader, would have stayed on as Secretary of State and took the steps and put procedures in place that would never let that happen again. Instead of shifting blame, making up lies, and telling the families lies, and then just moving on and starting to run for president. A leader fixes things and gets it right and then moves on.
You don't have any knowledge of the Clinton Foundation or the various money that has come to them from foreign sources? You know anything about that?
No. I just know what's been reported, sir.
Okay. Well, Gary, we appreciate this, and I'm sure your book's going to be a bestseller already, I think, on Amazon. And
well, thank you.
It's called Crisis of Character, and appreciate it. It was courage to come out and say what you said, and there's a lot more, ladies and gentlemen, in this book.